Okay, we are now streaming live on YouTube to accommodate all of the extra folks.
All
And
right.
I'm going to press the record button in Zoom. Just a second. And all right. So hello and welcome everybody to today's Info2Go webinar on neurodiversity in the library. My name is Annie Gaines and I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. This webinar is being recorded and we've muted all participants, but please feel free to use the chat box to communicate with each other or to ask us questions. Any questions you have, I will relay to our speaker during the presentation. And on behalf of the Idaho Commission for Libraries and our funding partner, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, it's my pleasure to welcome Lori Uria who is the president and founder of Neurodiversity Matters Idaho. Take it away, Lori.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Annie. And thank you everyone for joining today. As I saw people pop on, there's people from all over the country. So that's exciting to be able to have an opportunity to speak with you all. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about neurodiversity and why it's such an important concept to all of us. But what I thought I'd do is start off just telling you a little bit about me and why I'm so passionate about neurodiversity. I'm a parent of a young adult who was diagnosed with autism and attention deficit when he was about 7 years old. As a parent raising a young adult, I would have to say that, my husband and I raised our son really not with an emphasis on the limitations that were outlined by his diagnosis. We really just focused on helping him explore who he was, looking at his strengths, trying to navigate the world around him, and really as a young person trying to navigate the education system successfully. I think that probably my career and my experience really informed a lot of my parenting philosophy. I worked in the corporate sector and had the opportunity to work for a very progressive tech company for many years, and they had a philosophy of strength-based leadership, which really is the idea that you're maximizing the efficiency and the productivity and the success of an organization by continuously focusing and developing strengths of an organizational resources. And so I think I took this philosophy and I applied it to my principles of parenting. But I'll tell you that I did find it was a bit of a struggle because this idea of strengths-based philosophy isn't really pervasive, particularly in our sort of medical deficit-based mindset that we often have when it relates to people that are neurodiverse. So over the years of trying to support our son and interfacing with the education system and the programs that were offered to support him, I just grew increasingly concerned sort of about this pervasive use of deficit terminology. And it just seems to overshadow everything that we do as we relate to these young, uniquely wired minds. And so, while I really understand, that we have to have some kind of a diagnostic process to determine what challenges or what differences an individual might have for medical perspectives, it doesn't necessarily need to permeate everything. Annie, you have a question?
Yeah, we're getting some feedback from our participants that your audio isn't super clear. You're kind of coming in and out.
Okay.
So if it's possible, you could speak louder or we could try using the headset.
Okay, how about, let me try speaking a little louder. If that doesn't work, speak up. My apologies, everybody. I had a headset and I wasn't sure if it was going to work well. So let's see if I can talk a little bit louder to everybody. So what ultimately led me, my kind of, I guess my disillusionment with the philosophy that, we have in society around a deficit-based mentality, that really led me to start to make a career change, basically. So about 4 years ago, I decided to leave the corporate sector, and I embarked out on my own journey to start a nonprofit organization focused on advocating and advancing the neurodiversity cause in the state of Idaho. So I've had the honor to work with just some amazing young people through this last few years, neurodiverse individuals with all kinds of differences. I've worked with them, I've worked with their families. They've taught me so much. I've grown to appreciate so much the unique differences, the talents and the abilities of these individuals. And I just feel like, we have such an opportunity with a neurodiversity platform to really help individuals thrive. But definitely some changes have to be made in how we think and how we function as a society to really realize the potential of what neurodiversity can do for all of us. So let's talk a little bit about neurodiversity as a concept. So what I'm going to do is my sound better? I'm hoping that the sound is a little bit better, Annie. You guys will tell me if it's not.
It's a little bit better, yeah.
A little bit better, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about kind of how I'm going to flow this presentation. So basically, I'm just going to introduce you to what is neurodiversity, what does it look like, why is it important, what are the benefits of it, and then how do we view neurodiversity or use neurodiversity to form a different perspective on disability, and then how do we build a neuro-inclusive society, and then I'll open it up for questions and answers. So initially, neurodiversity is really a concept that provides a paradigm shift for how we think about mental functioning. So instead of regarding large portions of the American public as suffering from deficit, disease, or dysfunction in their mental processing, neurodiversity really suggests that we instead speak about people's differences in cognitive functioning. If you look at kind of how neurodiversity really looks and where the term originated from, so the term actually originated back in the 90s, so it's been around for some time. And it was really originally came to be in the concept of the autism community. So there were some advocates in the autism community that coined the term, and it was really about trying to help individuals look at autism in a different light instead of looking at it through the lens of somebody that has a deficit or disease or something wrong with them. It really allowed people to look at autism from a different perspective. From there, the term just really got a lot of traction, and it began to be increasingly adopted by other organizations, social justice causes, and entities that were really trying to advocate on behalf of other conditions. So now really neurodiversity encompasses people that have learning differences like dyslexia, ADHD, as well as the autism spectrum. It also includes mental disorders around anxiety, mood disorders, depression. It also encompasses things like traumatic brain injuries and other conditions. So it's really become a very broad-based term that applies to many applications around neurological wiring that's unique or what you would call atypical. So the idea is that what's interesting about it is the mental health component is still a little bit up in the air as far as perspectives on whether mental health is really included in this. But I think that the brain science and the learning that we have now with research on the brain is really starting to show that clearly mental health related conditions are very much neurodiverse conditions. If you think about it and you look at it in the context of cognitive functioning, it's really very much a cognitive functioning related difference, because when there's a saying, when your anxiety level is up, your IQ drops. So the idea is that it really does, mental health really does impact our ability to think, to process information. Okay, question, Annie?
Oh, it was just getting a little bit quieter again. So I just wanted to, it might have been because the papers were in front of the laptop. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. So I will, that could very well be it. I'm covering up my own speaker. Sorry, guys. We'll get this figured out. I'll get this figured out. So, all right. So I love this little slide. So this kind of does this provides sort of a cool concept or a little bit of a story around neurodiversity. So here's Pat, right? And this is Pat's brain. And Pat has some friends and they all have brains that are different. There's no two brains that are exactly alike. And this makes us all neurodiverse. But one of the ideas with brains is that brains, while we tend to think of brains where there's a standard brain that we all measure against, there's really not. Brains are as unique as fingerprints. So some people's brains are similar enough that they behave in ways that are categorized and labeled. And some of these labels can be things like autism or schizophrenia or bipolar or an epileptic. And then other labels indicate neurodivergence, such as, sorry guys, you may hear a dog in the background. We were laughing earlier, Annie and I were, that you all love dogs, so you may hear my dog talking in the background. I apologize if she is. So these labels that we typically think of, except for the label of typical, indicate neurodivergent. So that's really just a deviation of your brain from society's expectation of what's sort of within a normal range. So not all neurodivergence is diagnosed or even diagnosable. This means that not all people are perceived as neurotypicals. So someone may think they're neurotypical, but they may just simply have never received a diagnosis that indicates that they're neurodivergent. So this idea that some people are neurodivergent, some people aren't, and that there's this nice clean line really doesn't exist. It's very much about brain variations. And even within categories of certain diagnostic labels, there's significant brain variation. You'll often hear people talk about autism with, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because there's so much variation within that diagnostic category. So neurodivergence isn't really either good or bad. A person can be born with it. It can actually be acquired. If someone acquires a mental health condition or someone acquires a brain injury of sort, they can acquire or become neurodiverse. So it's really a matter of, how we are, how we are as individuals uniquely wired. And then those groupings of wiring where you see some similarities, that would give you a diagnostic category of someone that would qualify to fall within kind of this idea of a neurodiverse range. Okay. So let's look a little bit about what kind of variations do we tend to see when we talk about neurological variations. So this is an interesting concept for people to think about. You often hear the term spectrum with respect to autism. Autism as a spectrum. Oftentimes people think about autism on this sort of linear path. Either you're what they, in older terminology, you're lower functioning at the bottom of the scale and you're higher functioning at the top of the scale. But that's not really at all how neurodiversity works. It's really more of a, just in this, a prism kind of concept where there are different skill areas or brain function areas that may have a mix of strengths and weaknesses. So for example, in the executive function area, there's 10 to 12 different skills or brain functions that fall within executive function. Someone may have very high levels of abilities to manage time. They may have very low levels of being able to control their emotions or being able to prioritize or plan. So when you think about this, don't think in the context of someone's either really high. If someone's really low on the scale, that doesn't really mean anything. It just means that they have variations within all of these different categories. So if you look at the categories, they tend to fall within these realms of social and communication functions, cognitive thinking abilities, executive functions, that's back to the planning and organizing and managing time, emotional response, information processing, verbal and sensory skills, and motor skills. So it's a range of variations, and someone is in either all of something or little of something. They're very, very, there's a great deal of variance across those areas. So this will give you kind of a perspective. So if you look at neurodiversity, it's really kind of a concept of individual skills sort of being out of balance or being imbalanced, if you will. So some people may struggle with things like organizational skills and timekeeping, or sensory related things like background noise or smells or various lighting. But they may also be very brilliant in some areas around connecting ideas and pattern thinking, or thinking outside the box, or three-dimensional thinking, or seeing the big picture. And there's a host of other strength-related aspects. So if you look at the graph, you have to realize that they're very spiky. Someone that falls kind of within what they would define as typical, or sometimes neurotypical, the line that goes through the center of the spikes is better represented as someone that would kind of fall within a neurotypical range, where someone within a neurodiverse range may have some very high highs and some lower lows. The other thing that's important to distinguish is that neurodiversity really isn't tied to IQ. A lot of people think that neurodiversity has to do with lower level intelligence, and that's absolutely not even remotely the case. So overall, IQ can be anywhere in a range. The difference really is the spikes of that individual's personal profile. Okay, so why is neurodiversity so important? Well, it's important because this is just a vastly growing population. If you look at the last 60 years or so, the number of psychiatric categories or illnesses that have been created has tripled. So, you know, we are continuing to find, or researchers are continuing to find, an increasing number of variations in the human brain. And then they're finding enough people that sort of fit within that variation sector that they can categorize a diagnostic or create a diagnostic term. And that number just continues to grow. There's thinking that pretty soon the number of people that would actually fall into a neurodiverse range might actually supersede the number of people that fall within a neurotypical range. So you also have to consider, you know, just some of the data that's out there. So 1 in 5 students between the age of 13 and 18 live with a mental health condition today in our country. 50% of the US adult population is projected to be diagnosed with some kind of a mental health condition by the time they're 40 years old. 1 in 59 are diagnosed on the spectrum now. So, you know, the numbers have just dramatically increased, and you can see the continuum over on the right of the number of people since 2000 that now meet the diagnostic criteria for an autism diagnosis. Over 6% of our children are being treated for attention deficit. 4.4% of the adult population has a diagnosis of attention deficit. 1 in 5 children have learning or thinking differences in our country. You know, 1 in 16 public school students have IEPs for learning or other related issues. So the number of people that are starting to, you know, look in a variance manner that vary from what we kind of deem as the normal functional mental operating brain, that number's growing a lot. So we really have to start taking this much more serious than we have in the past. So I thought this was kind of a fun slide. So neurodiversity, people of all walks of life are among us that are neurodiverse. Neurodiversity is often considered what they call an invisible disability. So just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There are people all over the place that are neurodiverse. A lot of highly successful people in our world are neurodiverse, and you can just see, I won't go through all the names, but you can see that there are a lot of people that have all kinds of neurodiverse related brains. I think there's a couple of people that I just thought would be fun to highlight here for you. So Stephen Shore, he's right in the center of your slide, gentleman with glasses. He is a really interesting man. He is now studying to complete his PhD in education. When Stephen was diagnosed at the age of, well, he actually wasn't diagnosed, but he was at the age of 4 deemed by clinical professionals as someone that should be institutionalized. He was nonverbal, and they didn't feel that he would ever be able to function in society, and they recommended to his parents that he be institutionalized. But here he is today, a huge advocate for neurodiversity, a PhD, or he may have his PhD as of today, in special education. So the man is really brilliant. You can find his YouTube videos out there. Really interesting fellow. The other person that many of you may have heard of is Temple Grandin. There was actually a movie on her. Temple Grandin is a really interesting woman, highly intelligent, has done a great deal in animal sciences and advocating for fair treatment of animals. She created the system that humanely treats cattle as they're taking cattle to processing. But she's very well known. She's a great advocate in the community and highly, highly successful. But if you've ever watched her, she's so quirky and she's just wonderful. I just absolutely love watching her speak because she's so brilliant and just so real. So think about that, as you're walking around and you're encountering someone maybe that's a little bit unique, that you're thinking they're kind of off. Maybe they're neurodiverse, maybe they're not, but it's just something for you to think about, and don't assume that because someone falls within this neurodiversity category that they can't be highly successful in life. So I think one of the things that's really important for people to start to understand and embrace is the way that we think about disabilities in our country. So if you look at kind of the classical model for the way that we think about disabilities, if you follow a medical model, a person's disabled by having abnormalities and deficits in their brain or in their body. The idea is that disabled people are broken or abnormal or damaged versions of human beings that should be fixed or cured or prevented. And that's kind of this medical model mindset. Since the disabled person's impairments prevent them from functioning normally, well, they need their caregivers and professionals to make decisions for them. And a disabled person is sort of an object of charity. We all feel like we need to give to support that disabled person, and they're a receiver of help. They're not really, functioning as any person in society that is without a disability. The idea is that they have to adjust to fit into our society. Since they're not one of us or not normal, right? They have to be part of a society that means rising above their disability to fit in. So if you look at the social model of disability, that is the more progressive thinking today. I would love to tell you that it's well adopted, and I don't know that it is. It's sort of emerging. In some sectors, it's becoming much more dominant, but the medical model still overrides much of the thinking and much of what we do in society. So in a social model of disability, the person's disabled by their environment, and it's physical or attitudes or communication and social barriers. Disabled people are normal with variations. They are entitled to have equal rights and access society just as anyone else, and be able to be who they are and get the support and the things that they need based on what they need, and not just defined by society's typical view of a person functioning. So since disabled people are inherently equal, right, they have a right to autonomy and choice and free and informed consent in their own lives, and they should be supported by society because they are equal and they have a right to inclusion. The community should adjust its own barriers and biases. So this is a really, really important mindset for people to start to make a shift. I think a lot of people conceptually embrace this idea of a social model, but so much of what we do doesn't really represent what we may think. So we're still very stuck. If anything, we're stuck in the middle, but I would say that we're still leaning heavily towards this sort of medical model mindset where people are broken and they need to be cured or fixed, or we just simply have to take care of them. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how, as a society, we can be more inclusive. There's lots of things that we can do as individuals, as businesses and organizations to start to become a more inclusive community. So number one, you guys are taking the first step today, right? You're here learning about neurodiversity and brain-based differences. I think that it's really important that we start to accept people's differences and stop trying to fix them, right? We may think that we need to fix everyone that doesn't fit that normal parameter, but in reality, a lot of people don't need to be fixed, right? They need to be included and supported and celebrated for the differences that they bring. So there's a lot of focus, and I experienced this in the school system with my son, on behaviors. If you don't behave within a certain norm, you're not behaving, as a typical person. There's something wrong with you. And I think that we spend too much time focusing on trying to change people, neurodiverse people, as opposed to trying to change ourselves. We treat the whole person, not just as a group of symptoms or conditions. There's a lot of perceptions out there, misperceptions out there about people that have a diagnosis of a mental health condition, or someone that has a diagnosis of autism spectrum, or someone that has ADHD, that if you have that diagnosis, you'll behave this certain way. And back to the idea that, there are massive variances in every one of those diagnostic categories. So to assume that because you have a certain label, you're going to behave a certain way or function at a certain level is crazy. It's just not even remotely real. We really need to increase the collaboration of system of care. So what do I say what do I mean when I'm talking about that? I see a lot of individuals that have a diagnostic, that have been assigned a diagnosis. They may seek professional help from one care provider or provider. For example, they might go to the psychology office, but there's no communication between the psychologist and the doctor, or there's no communication between the doctor and the school, or there's no communication between the school and the parents. So we function very much in silos based on diagnostic categories. We don't look at the person as a whole person. And I think that is extremely damaging in how we support individuals. We support them as their diagnosis instead of as an individual, a whole person. We often, we create a lot of barriers for individuals. We make programs extremely complex and difficult to navigate. For someone that does have some type of learning difference, they may be highly brilliant, but if we make, if they're very much a visual learner, for example, and we make everything auditory, or they're an auditory learner and we make everything visual, we don't create systems for information and make them accessible. There's a concept called universal design language, and that is really the idea that we address in content and information a range of learning styles. We need to do that. It needs to be much more pervasive in our society. We need to align our programs and our services around individual needs, again, versus a diagnostic label. Embracing a growth mindset to facilitate individual growth. So this is a really powerful concept. It's introduced in the schools. I don't think it's really terribly pervasive in our society, but the idea is that our brain does continue to grow, and it is what they call neuroplasticity. which means that it can continue to grow. We can continue to form new brain pathways, and that we can continue to grow regardless whether we have successes or not. In fact, failures are actually kind of the growth engine for growth mindset. We talk about growth mindset, but we don't necessarily embody growth mindset. I think as a parent, this is something I'd never even heard of the term growth mindset when my son was growing up. But the more I've learned about it, the more I use that as a parent to help support him and help him see that, we all have failures, and failures aren't really failures, they're learning opportunities. So I think that as society, if we can embody that and we can role model that in everything that we do, I think that's very, very powerful. Adopting the best practices to affirm strengths and support individualized needs. This is probably of anything I can think of, one of the most powerful concepts. And I feel like it just completely falls short. As I explained, from my background, I really learned the power of strengths-based learning, strengths-based functioning, but it's certainly not pervasive in our school systems. Our school systems really function more, and this isn't every school system, so please don't take offense if you know of some that do, but as a whole, most of our special ed programs where a lot of these neurodiverse individuals ultimately end up, it's very remediate the problem. It's not strength-based learning. So we really need to enable individuals to work within their strength zones, whether they're in the workplace, whether they're in the school system, whether they're at home, wherever they're at out in the community. We need to help people understand their strengths, and we need to allow them to function within their strength areas because they can be so successful when they do. All right, so kind of gave you the global view of what we can do. So let's think about education. And I touched on this already, but if you look at, the special education paradigms today, really our special education paradigms are really built around a disability or deficit-based model, right? We test to detect deficits and disorders and functions, and we work to remediate weaknesses. We build behavior plans. We meet instructional objectives, maybe modified instructional objectives. We teach, learn to live with your disability. We really don't teach, the diversity-oriented mindset to these individuals. So these young people are growing up with the idea that they're less than, that they don't have value. And I see this in the work that I do because I work closely with a lot of young people that have graduated high school. They're amazing people, and it's heartbreaking to hear their stories and their education experiences. Some have good education experiences. This isn't every school. I'm not trying to beat up on the schools or the teachers because I think teachers are amazing, but the system isn't working. Annie?
There's a question in the chat if there is something like a best practices document that folks could look at and follow.
I have a lot of material. I don't have it right now. Is it something, Annie, if I created something that you could send out to this forum?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of material. I'll have to think about maybe how to repurpose it a little bit for you all, but absolutely, I can send something out. Would love to do that. So I will absolutely put something together for all of you. So I think you get the point, right? We have to rethink education, and it really starts there because these young people are growing up in an education system that's making them feel less than, and they come out without self-confidence. They don't believe in themselves. They feel like they're broken. They don't think they can learn, and it's heartbreaking, for them to see that, especially when I see the side of them that I see. So think about the workplace, right? So there's a lot we can do in the workplace. We can modify recruiting and hiring practices. So a lot of people, neurodiverse people, don't really interview very well. And if they're, if they have an in-person interview, or if it's an interview structured on maybe they're showcasing their abilities or something like that versus just answering a bunch of questions, they can be very successful. But we don't necessarily have, a lot of organizations don't have those kind of practices in place. More and more are. There are more companies that are becoming more neurodiverse friendly and building inclusive workplaces, but it's still probably the exception as opposed to the rule. Offering more flexible work schedules and options can help someone, particularly think about someone that has bipolar. They're highly productive through windows of time. They may have other windows of time they're not. Offer them the opportunity to take advantage of the massive productivity that they can have in those windows of time when they're, when they're in a place that they can work, or shorten work schedules, or rearrange work schedules. Making environmental modifications, I think more and more companies are doing that, but lighting, sound, you often hear the flickering lights of old fluorescent bulbs can be really offensive to a lot of people. The sounds, the smells. I worked for a company for a period of time that their break room always smelled. There were a lot of individuals that loved curry, and their break room always smelled very much like curry. There are certain individuals that would have extremely difficult time with that. So workforce and neurodiversity education, there's a lot we can do there, right? Just educating employees about your coworkers and the neurodiversity of your coworkers, and being more sensitive and compassionate to their needs. Providing access to tools and technologies to increase work productivity. There's a lot of technologies that can help individuals that struggle with reading or writing, or a variety of different things that can really help address and make them highly productive as a result of just a tool that we can provide. We kind of talked about the content accessibility, the UDL compliant kind of idea. Coaching and mentors. There are a few companies that are actually providing coaching and mentors. So if you think about it, oftentimes individuals that fall within sort of this neurodiversity sector are often the people that may have issues in the workplace and end up being written up, right, for something that they did. Providing coaching, providing mentors to help those individuals can make an enormous difference. Job carving. So instead of just forcing people to fit into a specific job, let's look at how can we align jobs to an employee's strength going in, making a large percentage of their day doing what they do extremely well, and maybe a minimal amount of their day. There's a lot of organizations implementing work teams just based on this concept. So those are some of the things we can do in the workplace. Just in the community overall, it's just really about us using thoughtful and respectful language, right? And I think part of this is really thinking about ourselves and how we, the potential biases that are even unconscious that we have. So it's a little bit of self-awareness on our part, on an individual's part, to just become more aware of the fact that, people do think differently. And how am I coming across? Am I coming across as judgmental or being biased? Getting to know people, ask questions, don't make assumptions that an individual, because they exhibit some behavior, is something, or find out, ask them, listen to them. It's amazing what you can learn when you want to, right? Be interested and care. Just because you can't see someone's differences doesn't mean they don't exist, right? And don't just judge them for being rude or stupid or whatever, people do. I mean, all the crazy things that people do and the assumptions that people make. Simplifying processes. When I think about government programs, I think about, a variety of kinds of programs that are out there that oftentimes, to navigate through the systems is so complex that someone that might have some kind of a learning difference would never be able to do it. So simplifying those processes or making them more friendly. Annie?
Yeah, more of a comment from the chat, but someone asked if providing interview questions beforehand would be something that would meet these folks' needs.
It certainly could. It could be very helpful. Yeah, giving someone, so think about someone that maybe, has a processing delay. They're asked a question right on demand in an interview, and they have to immediately come up with an answer. I struggle with that sometimes. So, yeah, I think that could be a great thing to do. Give them a heads up of the kinds of things that you're going to be looking for. Give them a chance to be able to put their thoughts together. I love that idea. I think it's just really important that, we as a whole, that we have to start to take on the mindset that we need to value diversity. It enriches our lives. There's a lot of innovation. If you think back to our slide earlier of some of the world's great innovators were neurodiverse individuals, there's a lot of innovation that comes from thinking differently. So how can we, value that and then create the supportive and inclusive and more inclusive environments that can help individuals thrive? Okay. So I think, my closing message to all of you is that, individuals that are neurodiverse are different. They're not less. You may not know someone is neurodiverse. You may make an assumption that they're being belligerent or different or rude or whatever they're being, but you don't know. So take time, slow down, take time to get to know them, talk to them, ask them questions, listen to them. And just know that, this is something that benefits all of us as a community. And I can tell you as a parent, how much I've grown, you guys, as a result of having a neurodiverse child. My personal development has gone through the roof. I think about myself so much more in the context of what I'm doing and how I come across and how I can be more helpful to my son, how I can change myself to help him. And what I've found is when I've changed myself, he changes, right? So instead of let's make him change and force him to change to fit into the world, how about I change and help him change as a result of it? So that's it's powerful all of us, and if we're open and receptive, we can all benefit from neurodiversity. Because you're librarians, I thought you should probably have some terminology. And I'm not going to read all of these, but you'll hear neurodiversity with in a lot of different contexts, not only the neurodiversity word, but you'll hear neurodiversity paradigm or neurodivergent, neurodivergence, a neurominority, a neurotypical. And I just wanted you to have this little slide to as you're talking about it, as you're writing about it, as you're communicating about it, it gives you a little bit of a definition. And I took this from an organization that's actually done a lot in the neurodiversity space for employment called Optimize. So I just wanted to share that with you so that you could all benefit and use that terminology. Okay, so that's all I have. I'll open it up to questions.
Yay, thank you so much, Lori. That was fantastic. So yes, if y'all have questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll get this going. While we're waiting for questions to come in, there was someone that said the library that they work for provides the interview questions at the time of the interview, so at least it's sitting in front of them as a written document. Mm-hmm.
I think anything that you can do that's a step above and beyond where you're at today is moving in the right direction, in my opinion. I recognize it's not easy for organizations to just completely overhaul everything they do. It's a process. And I think it's just becoming more mindful of, the people that you're potentially interacting with and thinking about and more thoughtful. What can you do to make things a little easier for them? And what you'll find is that usually when you do that, it benefits everyone. It's not just someone that's neurodiverse. We all benefit when some of these things are simplified or made a little easier.
I agree, definitely. Well, no questions yet, but we're hearing a lot of thanks and a lot of encouragement saying that this has been really informative and accessible information for folks.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Very good.
it looks like folks are starting to leave. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. This has been delightful. And thank you so much for Lori for presenting.
My pleasure.
All right. And so I've ended the recording.